All right.
I am here.
Here.
Hello, Your Majesty.
Present.
Yep, I'm here.
Here.
Yes.
Yes, and I propose to accept the minutes.
Seconded.
Yep.
Yes.
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 Yes. I mean, keeping in line with the CDC guidelines seems pretty reasonable to me, and that does it as far as I understand them.
And everyone would still have to adhere to the local guidelines of wearing masks and staying distance, even if they are vaccinated and whatnot. One thing I'm concerned about is, especially if it's travel with an airplane, that's a whole lot of recycled air. And I have seen, even though there's a lot more people that have been vaccinated than there has been issue with it. Um, there was just a story in the Fairbanks Miner that they're getting 5 to 10 calls a day of people who have gotten vaccinated and had a breakthrough where they got COVID. And so they were COVID positive, even though they got vaccinated. So it causes pause for people going and traveling, and especially being in an airplane with recycled air, as to what that exposure could be. And so, with that idea, is there any information on to those people who may have it, who are vaccinated and asymptomatic? Are they possibly carriers?
Do you have a link to that article? No, Arian, since she's the one who brought it up.
No, I do not at this time. I've just been looking at different news sources. My mom is the one that's way into the news, and she's got a couple of reputable news sources. I think it's with Clayton, who does some online stuff or whatnot, is probably where that information came from. I'll look into that and post it in the COC when I find it.
Something that I think is worth noting is that we are not saying that people who have received the vaccine don't have to wear masks or follow the other mitigation things. We are just saying that if you have traveled per CDC guidelines, we are not going to be restricting you. But all of our other safety things are still in place. It would be essentially the same as them going into a heavy populated place in Anchorage, and then coming out to play. That's kind of what I'm seeing from this new health agreement.
And so I guess I'd like to propose the idea that if you guys are open to it, of Northreach maybe not adhering to what the CDC says, but also still maintaining that 14 days after travel. As with Northreach, we tend to have higher standards on a lot of different areas compared to other kingdoms. But this is just my precaution and from what I've seen and learned from this whole epidemic.
So one of the big things about our organization is that while we do have people in our organization that are healthcare providers, it's not up to us to make healthcare calls. We always do encourage people, if they are not comfortable, to not attend in person. But if we make that sort of call, it does look like our organization isn't particularly following what the CDC guidelines are, and that's what most businesses are running off of. I understand the want to be incredibly safe, but also with a lot of this winding down as far as the pandemic goes, I don't see that the extra quarantine is necessary.
And I feel like, the CDC is kind of in the best position to know what's going on. Like, they're doing all the research, they're keeping track of everything. And I feel like if they're saying that this is okay if you're vaccinated, I mean, they're the ones to trust. Like,
Though I just recently had a friend visit from Washington, and I stayed masked and distanced, but also talking to her, she was just like, "Oh my gosh, everywhere I go, not only do I have to wear a mask everywhere, but I am temperature tested, and before I go into a store, I have to answer all of these questions that we answer before we play Amp Guard and stuff." And I know that up here, the regulations are more relaxed on that, and that is not the case when you go to the store, you know and in my own community, I'm seeing that there's a lot of people that are wearing masks, but there's a lot of people also not wearing masks. I've heard stories from up in Soldotna and Kenai where there's a lot of people not wearing masks, and I've seen a lot of posts from the people that I know up in Wasilla that they are adamantly against wearing masks. And so when the CDC are putting out these things and whatnot, it may be based on these states that they do have higher regulations on wearing those masks and keeping that distance and being more precautious than Alaska has been. So that's where I guess my pause comes in to look at people who have traveled and whatnot, because there can be a higher contamination factor because you're being exposed to the people at the airport, the people on the airplane, and all of that and whatnot, and just want to keep people safe. So perhaps it is subjected to the different towns and stuff. And so this does make it a tough issue, as different towns and different states could be holding different regulations and, having different results and keeping things down because of that.
Personally, I'm
but
not
again,
concerned.
I feel like it comes kind of back to what Boot was saying, though, about, you know, people, if they're not comfortable, need to be able to make that decision for themselves not to come. And eventually things are going to have to start moving towards reopening. The states are starting to reopen. People are vaccinated. We have such a high percentage of people that are vaccinated. We're working towards that, and we need to start making steps to allow for those things and start, kind of moving forward a little bit. Everybody, all over the state, they're trying to do things to reopen and trying to do it as safely as possible. And if all we're doing is making an allowance for people who have been vaccinated but been out of the state recently, like, that's a fairly minor change in the grand scheme of things. But ultimately it comes down to people making the decision for themselves as to whether or not they feel safe to go out, and that's not a decision that we can really make for people ultimately.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's where I was kind of going with this too. Is like, I'm not really concerned what the what everybody else's policies are, what are happening in different states and whatnot. This is our mitigation plan. This is not our prevent all risk plan. We're mitigating risk. We're not trying to eliminate it. And so that's really where I'm standing on this. Is we're giving people an opportunity to still participate in Amped Guard if they feel comfortable with it. We're doing something to mitigate risk. We're not eliminating the risk for them. If they don't want the risk, then they just don't come to Amtgard.
And
Well,
we're following the
responsibility is-
guidelines of the experts. We're following the guidelines suggested by the people who know what they're talking about. And as Rain just pointed out, like even the jails have reopened. We're allowed to go into the jails now to do jail visits with our clients, vaccinated or not. We're allowed to go have in-person contact visits with our clients as long as, proper mitigation procedures are followed. And they're one of the most high-risk populations that we've got because everything's so concentrated.
It's a
And
matter of personal responsibility at this point. As an organization, we've had the plan that we've had in place. It was voted on by the BoD. Changing the wording to follow CDC guidelines doesn't change a whole lot from what we were already doing.
though it does bring in that risk factor that anybody that has traveled doesn't have to quarantine for 2 weeks before they come and join games, which could open up the exposure to a certain extent. So I don't know where one outweighs the other. Would people feel more comfortable? And maybe we could even readdress this in 2 weeks. I'm not saying that no, we shouldn't do this ever. I'm just saying like maybe for the next 2 weeks we could hold off and see where things go and still require that 2 weeks, because we're not like banning or stopping games or anything. We're just saying, hey, if you have traveled out of state and you have done, and that's great to know about the airplanes that they have those extra stipulations. This is a definite positive thing that's come out of COVID, to have those extra filters on the planes and stuff. I'm just saying to help extra cut down that risk factor, because there's a lot of people that don't travel and haven't traveled in years, whether it's been COVID or not. And to know that anybody that does have to travel has to wait another 2 weeks just to be extra sure, and to provide that extra safety, that maybe we could just hold off on this for a couple of weeks and see the other. But I'm just trying to bring this up as a something
So
to consider.
what is the difference between somebody traveling to somewhere where they're also required to wear masks and then coming back, and me going to the store here in Anchorage, which has the highest density population and quite a few positive cases in the entire state, going to the grocery store?
So one of the differences that I see right there is that when you go down to the States, I know that we've had like 1 or 2 instances and it's been very brief and there's not much information about these other strains of COVID, though it's pretty guaranteed, especially if you're going down to Seattle or Washington. That's a main hub of people transferring and moving from one place to another. So it could expose to these other variants of COVID and could bring that to Alaska more and more as the
They're already here.
They are already here. It's already confirmed. At this point, if somebody is not comfortable being out in public, they should probably stay home. At this point, we have paperwork that we've already worked on, a health agreement that the majority of people have worked on. I don't see any difference between being out in public in the city and being out in public somewhere else.
I agree. And I really feel like we've got just from the discussion that we've had so far, it feels like there's just a majority of the board on board with one that's really has concerns, and I agree they're valid concerns, but I think with what we're looking for, it's really we're looking to mitigate. We're not looking to eliminate risk, and I'd like to move forward with this. I'd motion to approve the Amtgard of Alaska agreement that's updated that the Queen posted in the chat.
Yes, Your Majesty.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I accept.
Yes.
No, I do not accept.
Yes.
How much money did we lose?
It came up to about $2,400.
Well, I guess let's be busy this summer with our fundraisers.
No, yeah, and Rose Death, you're right. It wasn't bad. I really think the how we approached the pandemic here at the beginning, and then with like Valerian and Zyogen both made some really good choices to kind of keep money from going out the door when we knew we didn't have any coming in. So it's a really good job on them.
All right, thank you. I was just curious.
Cool. Well, thank you. So Jackson was playing with us when we were freehold for a little bit, and then he was very active in our Minecraft server. Lots of people recommended him for roses. Him and his dad are very adamant about building weapons and shields, and kid takes his shots on the field when he was playing with us. Not disrespectful. Hangs around, has fun, and does what Amped Guard does to be. Respectful, takes his shots, and just he does good there. He plays Druid most of the time, Druid and Warrior. Very good at weapon crafting with his dad, and something they bond over. And I don't sound any reason why he shouldn't be able to. He's 13 now, and he should be 14 in, I believe it's about 9 months or so. I believe in about 9 months.
And his dad plays.
Yeah, his dad plays Warrior. He's actually making his own armor right now.
Do you feel like he could pass the Reeves test?
Not sure, honestly. Didn't think about having anybody except officers in my park taking a Reeves test. I mean, they're more adult players do know a little bit more. I have a couple people who do study the rulebook because, well, they're nerds like the rest of us. But
Well, and to be true, it's great to have like everybody know the rule book or pass the Reeves test, even if they're not officers. Though not everybody does, but it's also, really good to make sure that kids have a good understanding of that information. And also, as kids, they don't quite have as many distractions in life, and they also have that avid interest. So that might be something that they would just totally suck up and enjoy.
Yeah, I think for players that are underage, it is important to have them be exemplary players because we are making an exception for them. I know that for players that are over the age on the waiver, we can't really be like, hey man, you probably shouldn't set foot on field if you don't know what's in the rule book. But because we are making an exception for an underage player, I feel personally that it's very important that they would be able to have knowledge that they could exercise of the way that the mechanics work.
we've had a decent variety of classes in our park, and whenever there's any questions, we are a small park, and so everybody's like okay with stopping. Like there's 6 people on average, 6 to 9 people, and everybody's still kind of learning. So we'll stop and like have people explain their abilities if nobody understands them, and everybody learns kind of as a park right now, which is really exciting, especially those younger players.
That's true. With you guys being a shire, the activity is probably not as chaotic and dense as some of the larger parks. So you do have those learning opportunities. Again, I think making sure that the kid, I mean, they don't have to be, in my mind, again, reef certified, but able to prove that they have active knowledge of the book because we are making an exception for them. I think that's important, but not like, again, that's not really going to make or break my vote. He's very close to 14, so.
I
feel like
also
he's able to hold his own out on the field. Are you confident in his abilities to hold his own on the field?
More than confident. He's very much plays out there. He's learned Druid. He's made spell strips for his class and knows his incants.
So does that mean he's already been out there playing on the field?
Yes, when we were a freehold.
Oh, got And one thing I'm curious, has he done any trying out the reaving or helping with retrieving weapons or something like
He has been active in trying to help bring equipment to and from vehicles, but I don't really ask anybody except my officers to reeve. That way everybody else has the opportunity to enjoy the day as much as possible.
On that note, I do recommend like throwing it out there and putting it out to people, because when I personally first started playing, I didn't know that I could help in that capacity. I didn't know that I could just write a quest or come up with a battle game. And so that can be a great thing to put out there and say, hey, anybody who wants to reeve, anybody who wants to come up with some different games or whatever, we'd love to hear what you have to say. So just as a side note there.
Cool. Is there any other questions that I could try to answer for you guys?
I mean, I
Thank-
can't think of anything. The fact that he was already on the field when you were a freehold and he wasn't a problem. I mean, I feel like that kind of bypasses some of the stuff I normally like to see, like somebody, being involved in non-combat capacities before we approve them. So, which it sounds like he also does. So, I mean, he sounds like a pretty solid candidate to me.
I moved to accept. I don't remember. Jason was his, whatever his name was, as a regular member.
What is his name once again?
Jackson Durant.
Sounds good. I second that motion to approve Jackson Durant to play on field in Dark Lodge Crossing.
More the merrier, yeah.
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Second.
Yep.
Yes.
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 Yep.
I am not.
Probably.
Uncertain, yet to be determined.
Completely, I assure you.
Yes.
No. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, that last one was for myself. So, in the world of Guard, very enthralling meeting today for the COM. We discussed a couple of pretty big items. We talked about the COM meeting and what the expectations are. We will have 90 days to submit any items that we want to talk at the gathering meeting in July that has bumped our event. It's July 31st. And so if you have any items that you would like to make sure is included in that Circle of Monarchs meeting that needs to be voted on, it needs to be submitted within the next 90 days. Otherwise, it cannot go on to the agenda for that meeting. So if anybody has like pressing stuff they'd like to talk about, that would be the time. Please submit that information to your queen, and then she will disseminate the information to me. You see how I passed the buck there? You're welcome. And then we talked a lot about payments and how payments are going to be done. They will continue to have conversation about that. And what it ends up being is a user agreement for the AmpGuard trademark. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to do it. It's that payment that we've done yearly for AmpGuard, which originally was for legal fees and now is just for the upkeep of AI and running all the things that we do nationally for AmpGuard. Now, just to remind folks, AI is not the AI BoD. AI is the Circle of Monarchs and the BoD together. Together, that organization is AmpGuard International. So our representatives are myself and then, of course, Queen's Eye Jen as well. And so anything that decisions are made by AI, they usually get the approval of the COM before it goes forward. Now, the Circle of Monarchs meeting will be addressing rules changes. It will be talking about the package that will be presented by the rules people at the COM meeting, and that's where it'll be voted on. So all the surveys that are coming out right now are super important. And so we were told to encourage everybody to please fill out all the surveys, whether they're for the knighthood surveys, the battlefield knighthood, which is coming up for discussion, or whether it's about the new rules of play that are looking at going into effect. All that will be voted at that meeting, which will be 1,000,000 years long. So I'm so looking forward to it. Then the next thing that we talked about at the COM meeting was the investigation for Northreach and sort of the aftermath of that and what kind of led up to it, and giving us a debrief and a summary of the events. As you know, I posted that the Northreach was found to not have done anything inappropriate in the investigations of that. And that's from weeks and weeks of work. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that it was not anything that was done lightly. And it was done with all of the pomp, circumstance, and attention to detail that's needed in there. And AI BoD found that that Northreach had followed all the rules that they needed to with all the information they had currently, and followed it up in an appropriate manner. And so what the discussion was about was just giving a debrief of all of that, and making sure that kingdoms understood where we were coming from, so that if there were any questions that we could answer them. Like most of that is under the non-disclosure agreement, so we can't really talk about a lot of the stuff that was discussed there. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your top 5 members, Queen's Eye, Jen, and myself, and we'd be happy to answer what we can about any of the investigation and how that happened. It's nice to finally put an end to that and be able to move on with our lives. and start looking at any progress happening in the future from that. So that was a nice end to that. What was the last thing we discussed? Oh, oh, that's what it was. Okay. Yeah, we talked about vaccinations and whether groups can require vaccinations, and there's been a lot of posts about that and trying to determine what they can do. I think that overall Northreach has a better handle on it than a lot of other groups do, and so I applaud our BoD for being proactive on that to make sure that we weren't caught with our pants down, for lack of a better term, on what to do for reopening. And that's all I got. Not it.
I don't really have a lot on it. It's just really we have our the PM LOIs are open. We have, I think, all but one park has a candidate that has put in an LOI. For the candidates that have put them in, I only know of one so far that has taken the Reeves and Kapora test. And yeah, Edge, I caught that one. But so make sure if you're running for office, if you took them earlier in the reign, they don't count. It has to be in that 1 month window before the election. So make sure to get your Reeves and Kapora test done. We are looking for a candidate in Frozen Coast, I believe, and this is an important position. I certainly would suggest having a PM before reopening, because that PM's got a big role for keeping the park safe. Yes, April 19th at 2 a.m. So it's not so really have it in by April 18th. The deadline's there, so we don't have anybody with those last minute midnight. I'm writing my LOI, going to bed, and I posted at 12:02, and it technically doesn't count because you're technically late. So we set it to 2 a.m. You have till 2 a.m. April 19th to get your LOI in.
Or like the 24th, 25th?
Correct. And then I'm hopeful those will happen at games, but we'll have to play that one by ear. And then PMs will take their seat at their respective mid reigns. that which is normal. I believe most of them are scheduled for May 1st and 2nd.
Yeah, sorry. I forgot I can talk in this one. Yeah, I was looking at May 9th for it. Awesome, thank you.
I'm so sorry. I'm also working on a typing project for the librarians, and I keep copy pasting, and my button is control, so I'm the worst.
Not a question, but an extra booth there on awards. Like seriously, people, talk to your friends. Talk to your. If you feel like you deserve award, feel free to put yourself in. If you see somebody else who deserves an award, do that, because we rely on those nominations to look at things. We come up with our own stuff, but we only see so much. I would like to highly recommend, if somebody does run that booth, to possibly look at doing a fighter's ring, especially with it being the Highland Games and there's a lot of people competing. These people not only want to hear about us, but man, if you can get them into the ring and play around, and maybe it doesn't cost any much more, that is the best way to get people engaged.
Is that something we're permitted to do at the Highland Games, Your Majesty? I know that
The last time we did it, we did in fact do a fighting ring, and we also had the archery booth there. Unfortunately, it was like 90 degrees. The fighting ring was not as popular as it would have been under other circumstances, but the archery booth was super popular. So it was a decent money maker, and I had heat stroke.
would you feel more comfortable if I know I'm going to be lynched for this. Would you be more comfortable if it were a dry event?
And as another idea is that we could do it like high school dance style. Once you come, you're there, and if you leave, you can't come back.
That takes away people's agency. I don't know if I'm super stoked with that.
Sorry, just got a couple calls from my kids. I don't know if you heard all of that.
Yeah, that's definitely got to be a kind of wait and see thing. I think anyway.
All right, hearing no further comments, questions, concerns, I am going to close this meeting in 3, 2, 1, and closed. It is 7:52 p.m. Thank you all for coming. I will repost the. Let me go ahead and close out this. Oh, the secret password, as I promised to Grok, would be Grokling.
Yay!